If you and someone from 25,000 years ago were both dropped into an ice age winter right now, you'd be dead within 2 weeks. Not because you can't handle a cold. You'd figure that out. You'd be dead because you have absolutely no idea what to do with October. See, your ancestors didn't fear winter. They feared arriving at winter unprepared, because by the time the temperature dropped, it was already too late. The cold you could solve. What you couldn't solve in December was the fact that the world had stopped feeding you 3 months ago. Winter wasn't a cold problem, it was a calendar problem. And once you understand that, everything about who your ancestors were makes a different kind of sense. Let's be honest about what they were actually up against. The last glacial maximum peaked around 26,000 years ago. Temperatures across the Eurasian steppe hit negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. But here's the number that actually decided who lived and who didn't. In those conditions, an adult human body burns 4,000 to 6,000 calories a day just to maintain temperature, roughly double what you need sitting still right now. Now take away the food for 4 months straight. No crops, agriculture didn't exist. Minimal large game, the herds had moved south. The mammoth was out there if you could find one, but you couldn't eat a mammoth every day. The cold was solvable. Your ancestors had been solving it for hundreds of thousands of years, but the cold was never the real enemy. The real enemy was the window, the 4-month countdown that started the moment the first frost hit and ended, if you made it, when the ground thawed. Miscalculated by a week, store slightly less than you needed, and nothing else mattered. It's not primarily a survival story, it's a logistics story. Planning, and a kind of obsessive annual preparation that modern humans have almost completely forgotten how to do. The entire autumn was one long emergency. Every decision from late summer onward pointed at one question: do we have enough to last until spring? Fat was the currency of survival, not meat, fat. Chemical analyses of Ice Age butchery sites shows marrow extraction and grease rendering at what researchers describe as industrial scale. When a mammoth was killed, the priority wasn't the muscle meat. Fat generates more heat per calorie than anything else, and in extreme cold, that difference was the gap between your body holding temperature through the night or not. They weren't eating what tasted good, they were eating what kept them alive in the dark. The hunting was built around this entirely. At a limestone cliff in eastern France called Solutré, hunters used fire and coordinated teamwork to drive entire herds of wild horses into a natural kill zone. Not once, for tens of thousands of years. Same location, same method, same season. Kill big in autumn, render the fat, store everything. The storage was engineered. Underground chambers connected to winter shelters by short tunnels served as natural freezers in permafrost regions. Meat kept frozen and accessible for months regardless of conditions above ground. There's even evidence of mammoth carcasses being weighed down and submerged in cold ponds, a natural refrigerator. No power, no moving parts, no failure mode. And crucially, none of this happened in isolation. Ivory tools have been found hundreds of miles from their origin sites. These weren't isolated groups scraping through winter alone. They were trading survival technology across vast distances. Proto-supply chains operating 20,000 years before writing existed. You didn't survive the Ice Age because you were clever. You survived it because you were connected. Here's what almost every version of the story gets wrong. Winter confinement, months of darkness, firelight, enforced proximity, didn't just test ancient humans, it built them. The sewing needle appeared around 50,000 years ago, a sliver of bone with a hole drilled through one end. One scientist called it possibly the most important invention in human history, and he has a point. A loose animal skin draped over your shoulders and a fitted, sealed, layered garment are not the same thing thermally. The needle closed every gap: sealed sleeves, fitted hoods, waterproof boots. Some researchers argued the difference between Neanderthals and modern humans surviving the same glacial conditions came down, in part, to the quality of their tailoring. Then there's what happened after dark. An anthropologist named Polly Weissner spent years studying one of the last groups living close to the original human pattern. She found that nighttime conversation was categorically different from daytime. During the day, 80% of talk was practical, logistics, hunting, resources. At night, around the fire, 81% of conversation was stories. The cave paintings at Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira, the earliest flowering of human creativity, most researchers now believe were created primarily during winter months. Confined, firelit, months of enforced stillness with nothing but each other and the dark. The first myths, the first religion, the first attempt to explain a world that kept going silent and cold and killing people with no apparent reason. None of it happened in the ease of summer. It happened in winter, when the world had nothing left to give, and the only warmth available was the fire and the person sitting next to you. Not everyone made it. At a site in Spain called the Cima de los Huesos, the Pit of Bones, 430,000-year-old remains show seasonal bone damage identical to hibernating animals. A 2023 study argued these individuals may have entered something close to biological torpor during the worst months, slowing metabolism, reducing caloric burn, waiting out winter in a kind of deep standby. It's contested. Scientists are still arguing. But the fact that serious researchers are debating whether your ancestors essentially hibernated tells you everything about how extreme the pressure was. The social reality was brutal in its own way. The archaeological record is consistent. The people who died first in hard winters were almost always those sleeping alone. Not because isolation was inherently dangerous, but because body heat is a real thermal resource. A family packed into a small shelter generates meaningful warmth. Community in the Ice Age wasn't a preference, it was insulation, and the ones who understood that were the ones who made spring. We think of civilization as something that grew from abundance, farming, surplus, the luxury of enough time to think about something other than survival. But look at what winter actually produced: storage systems, trade networks, fitted clothing, art, storytelling, religion, and the deep instinct to plan months ahead, because the cost of failing to do so was everyone you loved. Every one of those things was built in the dark, not despite the scarcity, because of it. Your ancestors didn't just survive winter, they let it make them into something the warmth never could. The next time January feels long, it's supposed to. That feeling is 25,000 years old, and so is your ability to outlast it.